suppose we may as well just start off by talking about Borg McEnroe.
Yes, running for your life from Shia LaBeouf. He's brandishing a knife at Shia LaBeouf. Lurking in the shadows, Hollywood superstar Shia LaBeouf. Living in the woods, Shia LaBeouf. Killing for sport, Shia LaBeouf. Eating all the bodies, actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. And what does that have to do with anything? Well, more or less sod all, obviously, save that the video that it's from amuses me greatly. Relevance is that it's about the only thing I can remember in several years, possibly going back as far as Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, associated with Shia LaBeouf that was positive and good, and in direct opposition to the seemingly constant tales of his plagiarism, plagiarised apologies for said plagiarism, and, generally being a complete arsonist of the once very popular actor. Fortunately, though, we are presented in Borg vs. McEnroe with an opportunity to reconsider and revisit LaBeouf the actor. Pity though, because, LaBeouf the actual cannibal would have been far more entertaining, but you can't have everything. At the end of the 1970s, the indisputable king of tennis was Sweden's Björn Borg, played here by Sverrir Gudnason, who, when we meet him, is aiming to win an unprecedented 5th Wimbledon championship in a row. The greatest stumbling block between him and this sporting milestone is the brash, but brilliant, young US player John McEnroe, LaBeouf, who has been making a name for himself as much for his on-court demeanour as his on-court prowess. Borg is seen as a machine. Cool, calm, calculating, in stark contrast to McEnroe's much more volatile personality. But it is a manufactured and cultivated exterior which hides within a history of self-doubt, impetuousness, passion and rage considerably more similar to McEnroe than anyone could possibly guess. Borg is the favourite, both in terms of expectation and in how he's viewed by the crowd. His great rival McEnroe is much more prickly, and his regular tantrums have not endeared him to the generally polite and conservative tennis-watching public. Janos Mets Pedersen's film, from a screenplay by Ronnie Sandal, tries to get to the heart of this famous rivalry between two of the sport's greatest proponents, and shows that they are nowhere near as disparate in personality as it seems on the surface. To that end, the structure will be entirely familiar to anyone who has seen sporting rivalry films before, but the reality in which this film is based allows for a refreshing twist in a well-worn format. To wit, while they have crossed each other's paths before, the rivalry for each man, the difficulty to be overcome, exists entirely within themselves. So, while the expected flashbacks to the formative years of each player give some insight into their personalities and history, there is no moment of insult or great defeat. Nobody spoke ill of nobody's mama, and, nobody served a 110-mile-per-hour ace directly at anyone's head. Instead, each man, and Borg in particular, has built up their opponent as the bogeyman entirely in their own mind. With, of course, the ever-helpful hand of the press. The film climaxes with the Wimbledon final, with Borg aiming for his 5th championship and McEnroe his 1st. Sadly, that's perhaps the least successful portion of the film, as it fails to capture the incredible tension that tennis fans like myself know can accompany tie breaks and match points. So in the end, it's perhaps not the most remarkable film, albeit still a solidly entertaining one, but it is raised above many of its peers by strong performances by Gudnason and Stellan Skarsgård, and while it's certainly not LaBeouf's best turn, has a pleasant reminder that he can act pretty well when he's not being an absolute tit. Add these things to the far from common approach to rivalry, and it's one worth checking out, particularly if, like me, you were lacking a good tennis film. Or perhaps any tennis film at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I quite enjoyed Borg McEnroe. I wasn't expecting pretty much anything of it, and I don't really know all that much about it other than the headline figures of Borg's reputation for roboticness and McEnroe's volcanic temper, which is obviously he's been trading on for decades by this point. And yeah, I quite enjoyed a lot of it. A lot of it put me in mind of Rush.
Yeah, I can see that, because it's not the kind of rivalry you'd get in, say, a boxing film. There is a respect between the peers there. They are peers, aren't they? I can see why that would remind you of Rush, certainly.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar in that a lot of the tennis is, as you say, all these battles are internal. Very little of it is actually directed at each other, and I found it quite quite effective, certainly in terms of getting a bit of insight into Borg's character. McEnroe seems to be there mainly as a counterpoint, as just a juxtaposition more than anything else. It doesn't go particularly deep into what brought him to where he is, but I don't think it really needed to. There wasn't all that much from what I can gather. It's just he's very good at tennis and has a bit of a short temper.
I think McEnroe is less of a mystery to people because he put so much of himself out there that I don't think people really were in any mystery, unless perhaps it was like, was this guy really not loved as a kid? And like, maybe his parents weren't the most attentive, but there was never, in this film anyway, that sort of suggestion.
Yeah.
Whereas Borg is a mystery. It's just, there's this Iceman persona.
Yeah.
A term that's applied to anybody vaguely Nordic, because nobody in the press, has any imagination at all.
No.
In his case, it's actually aptly applied because he's just so taciturn, and I love him for it because he's amazing. But Kimi Räikkönen's called the Iceman, but pretty much every Finnish driver has been called the Iceman at some point, and it kind of seems the same sort of thing with Borg here. But at least, that's what you can understand. He's not showing a lot of emotion, so when they explore him, it's certainly while it's called Borg versus McEnroe, the film could quite easily be called Borg versus Borg.
Yeah,
because that's the focus, and as you say, McEnroe is a counterpoint more than a main character, I guess.
It's no worse off for it. I was mostly kept quite captivated by Gundersson's performance is pretty good. Very happy with all that. He does a lot of smouldering quite well. Stellan Skarsgård is good, but he's got a bit of a thankless role for a lot of it because he does wind up having to basically just explain character motivations at points. He's lumbered with a lot of pretty clunky dialogue to just make things clear. He's a bit Basil Exposition in places, which is a little bit unfortunate, but he does quite well with it for all that.
Yeah, I think he rises above that. That's not an unfair thing to say about it, although I didn't feel it particularly.
It wasn't too forced. It made sense when it was happening. It just seemed like it maybe didn't need to be quite so explicit about saying it in those terms, you know what I mean?
As opposed to, for example, the commentators towards the end of the film in the final at Wimbledon, basically explaining why things meant things. Like,
yes,
that was A, laboured, and B, not actually particularly well done.
Yes.
And I'm left wondering too, in films like this, I know tennis, right? So I know that this is badly explained. Do other people know that? And kind of like, is that damaging other people's enjoyment of the film because they're not actually getting told what they really need to know in this situation?
Yeah.
So there are a couple of bits where things are a bit clunky. But fortunately, I feel that the character study of Borg more than makes up for that. Or mostly makes up for it, at least.
Yes, it does. I think this is well worth watching. I was quite intrigued by a lot of it. I don't really have anything negative to say about it more than some slight concerns about the clunkiness of some exposition. That's really about it. And everything else is really well handled. It looks pretty most of the time. I think this is quite well shot. Yeah, I can't really think of anything negative about it. I mean, I was not absolutely blown away by it. It's not my favourite film or anything like that, but I don't think I've really got much in the way of negatives to say about it, and there's an awful lot of positives in there. But yeah, if you've even the slightest interest in any sort of character piece, let alone whether it's sporting related or tennis related or anything else like that, Borg McEnroe is very well worth watching.
Yeah, I would say it does look quite nice. It's because it's going for an aesthetic, trying to make it look like a 1970s film.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't quite pull it off just because it's been shot digitally, but even if it hadn't been, that modern film stock would have been cleaner, or you'd never get quite the same look. But with the colour palette and things, it sort of evokes that era quite well.
Mm-hmm. And
it does a reasonable job of masking the fact that this was filmed on modern centre court at Wimbledon, and they largely hide the bits that are clearly too shiny and modern to be from the 1970s.
Yeah.
Although, sadly, part of how they did that was incredibly distracting lines on the grass, which aren't there now, and I don't remember having ever seen at Wimbledon before, but there's like really heavy brown roller lines on the court, which I know that nobody else in the world is going to care, but it was kind of annoying because they were so obvious. Like, okay, grass technology hasn't come on that much. I would imagine that the grass has been looked after at Wimbledon for largely the same way for about 100 years. And like, why does this look so different? And I've seen footage from the 1970s and I don't remember it looking quite like that. But I suspect that's actually a side effect of them massively increasing the warmth of the colour temperature. And it's brought out all the browns in the grass and made them look really weird. But yeah, that's a really nerdy thing to pick up on. It's like, the grass looks wrong. But fortunately, it's... and surprisingly little of the film takes place on a tennis court.
Yes.
So it doesn't actually come up all that often. It's quite pleasant to look at, I would agree. And all of that talking about grass just to say, yes, Scott, you're right.
Yes, it's good, apart from the grass.